Oh, who knew? Okay, everybody. Well, I am glad to see you all here today. Um, Looking at the calendar, I kind of slipped by me like a lot of other things. Monday, a week from today, is President's Day. School's going to be closed. Yeah, hey, sad, sad time. Another thing, we next week is the Ohio Society of Professional Surveyors um, state convention. I'm going to be attending that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So we will not have an in-person lab next week. You can still come to school and hang out if you want, but I'm not going to be here. We will not have an in-person lab around the corner. However, the lab we're going to start this week, I'm going to need you to keep working on it, and that's what you're going to work on next week as well. Um, just real quick, the lab, what we're going to do is take a deed, which is a legal description describing a piece of property, and we're going to turn it into a survey plat. So we're going to draft by hand. So this week, when you come to lab, bring your drafting kit. You will need it. Sound good? So yeah, I kind of forgot about the President's Day next Monday and not having class, and we will not have an in-person lab Wednesday. Yeah. So I want to talk about some boundary surveys and surveying of the public land system. Um, they are chapters 21 and chapter 22 in your elementary land surveying book. So in the United States, our land tenure system is a way land title and property rights are recorded, held, and transferred, primarily through written instruments and public records at different levels of government. The United States has a two-tier land system, with federal records being governed, or federal records govern federal lands, and state local records of all other lands are typically held in a county court or recorder's office, courthouse or recorder's office. Land titles are transferred by written documents called deeds. There's a couple different kinds: warranty deeds, quitclaim deeds, agreements, which contain a description of the property. These written record deeds are central to how our system is maintained and proved. What is title versus ownership? That's a great question. I'm glad you guys asked. Let's look at this. Title is different from ownership. Title is the means or authority which justifies the legal possession of property. It is not ownership of property, but it is the evidence of ownership. Title can be transferred by voluntary means, involuntary means, or inheritance. Voluntary means are probably what everybody's kind of most familiar with. That's where you sell land, buy and sell land. Involuntary means could be things like bankruptcy, foreclosure, tax, things like that nature. Don't pay your taxes, they take your land away. Or inheritance, if you get the land from mom and dad or grandma and grandpa, or however that goes. So here's another list of the common methods of voluntary transferring title of real estate. You have a grant deed, a quick claim deed, warranty deed, easement deed, and a will. Just want to specify too, please read your chapters, chapter 21. I'm just kind of summarizing this, so if you have some more questions about things, you know, look into reading a little bit more in depth in your chapter. Ownership is described as the legal right to possess and use property. It's the underlying bundle of rights in real estate. There are different forms of ownership. There's a sole ownership, joint tenancy, tenancy in common, community property, condominium, cooperative. They're all variations on who hold the legal rights and how they are shared. This isn't in the book, but I wanted to kind of touch on it at least. Lease versus license. You can lease land, you can get a license. A lease grants interest for a defined term in exchange for rent or other considerations. Leases typically give the tenant exclusive possession of the premises, meaning they can exclude even the owner except as the lease allows. They're definitely more formal, written, with stronger statutory protections and rights that can bind successors and title. As an example, I can think of some of you may be familiar with if you're out in the more rural areas. A farmer has a 400-acre farm. Maybe they're getting old, can't farm it anymore. They got a neighbor who's young person, and they got 20 acres. They could lease that farmland to the other person, and they have the right to come and use the land for farming. That's just an example, but it is defined as far as what you can use. I can lease that land to the farmer next door to come and farm the property, but that doesn't give him the right to come and like build a house on it or build any improvements. If we specify in a lease purely for farming, maybe it even says raising corn, soybeans, whatever, is for a specific reason and usually for a specific duration of time. You can get a license which grants you personal permission to do something on another's land but does not create any interest in the land. It does not provide exclusive possession. The owner retains control and can usually enter and use the land at will. It's often revocable, more flexible, less protected. Rights are usually not binding on future owners. And probably the easiest example I can think of, like the Cincinnati Bengals, anybody any season ticket holders? You have to buy a seating license before you buy your seat. That is exactly what this is right here, a license. That basically grants you permission to use the land for a specific purpose. You can purchase your seats, and that's kind of the legal thing there. I guess how the NFL teams can justify charging you more money. But that lease and license, I just kind of wanted to touch on that. I think it's kind of an important thing to know. Easements. That's also a very important thing we need to know. I think a lot of this stuff, as I was putting this together, I was kind of starting to get really deep in the weeds on like boundary law and stuff like that. And for you surveyors, you'll cover a lot more of this and more in depth in future classes. I at least wanted to introduce it to you now. An easement is a right by grant or agreement which allows a person or persons to use the land of another for a specific purpose. It always implies interest in the land on which it is imposed. Black's Law Dictionary lists and defines 18 types of easements. Therefore, the exact purpose of an easement should be clearly stated. So, for example, let's go back to the farms. I've got a big tract of land. My neighbor behind me has a tract of land. The easiest way they can access it might be a dirt road I have going down the property line that goes all the way back to the back property. I could grant them an easement of access. We typically, in surveying speak, would say an ingress-egress easement. It means access to travel back and forth. They have no other rights to the land other than to use that particular area for that sole purpose, just to get in and out of their property. So if that person in the back wanted to, say, build a house and they needed to run a water line from the house or from the road up to the house, they could not use that ingress-egress easement to build a water line through it. Their sole purpose is access. Now, I could grant them another easement or a separate easement saying, yeah, you can have this strip of land to use to build your water line. I still own the land. They just have, I'm just granting them permission to use a little bit of the land, a little strip to build a utility on. I didn't want to get into all the types of easements. Ingress, egress are very common. Utility easements are also very common. Those can be held by utility companies in order to run water line, gas lines, electric lines, overhead, underground, whatever, across the piece of property. They do not actually own that land that their utility's running through. They are just granted access and permission to run their utility through that area. Anybody got any questions on easements or what that means?
Water lines are just lines across the property that grants access. That's what an easement.
An easement lets some person use another person's property for a specific reason.
For like a water line.
A water line might be one specific reason. They would get a specific utility easement for that. I first started off with the ingress egress. Just you can have a strip of land to use to drive back and forth to get to your property. An ingress egress access easement, if you will. So we kind of mentioned legal descriptions. There's a handful of different types of legal descriptions. First one here to talk about is a metes and bounds description. A metes and bounds description describes a property by distances and directions from one property corner to another, going around referencing monuments, adjoiners, physical or recorded calls. So I know this is kind of hard to see. This is a generic sample plat, and you'll actually have a copy of this specific example plat in your lab packet this week. The metes and bounds portion is the description. The metes portion of a metes and bounds means the bearings and distances and whatever other kind of information to describe the property line going around. Your direction, your distance. The bounds portion of a metes and bounds means you are labeling, listing the adjoiners. Who owns the properties around you? There are, I've seen in some very rural areas, just pure bounds descriptions. And that literally says, okay, if I'm standing in the middle of my property, I'm bounded on the north by this highway, bounded on the east by this farm, bounded on the south by some subdivision, bounded on the west by so and so's farm. That's very difficult to retrace and resurvey. It's just saying I'm bounded by these people or properties or roadways, things to that nature. The deed we'll have in um, our lab will have the meets describing the bearings and distances around the property and also talk about the bounds as far as the adjoiners and what is up against our property. So when you have a meets and bounds description, it needs to contain a few things. A description of land by meets and bounds and a deed should always contain at least the following information: a point of commencement. Uh, it will be listed as a POC, abbreviated on a survey or in a deed. And what this is an established reference point, such as a corner of the Public Land Survey System or the NSRS, the National Spatial Reference System, from which a property described is tied or referenced. This requirement varies by state and by county. Some states, your point of commencement can begin at an intersection of two roads. Some places will allow you to begin at the corner of a recorded subdivision. It doesn't, or depending again where you are, if you tie to a section corner. The next thing is the point of beginning. This is the actual point on which the boundary begins. It's where the description actually starts, where it starts going around the property lines, and it has to come back into and close that same POB. Does that make sense? So the POC is starting at a reference point that is easy to find. Then there are usually calls to where the property is itself. And when you get to the property corner and start talking about the property itself going around it, that's where you hit the POB. That's where the boundary starts and ends. Now it must define the corners. So clearly described corners with sufficient information to locate or recover monuments or other durable evidence. There are various types of monuments. I did not get in here the rules of construction as far as the order of importance of what should be held. Monuments go like natural monuments versus artificial monuments. A natural monument could be a ridge line, could be a tree, could be the center of a creek or a roadway. What would be considered an artificial monument would be something that we set. So a lot of times, a 5/8 inch piece of rebar, 30 inches long or something like that. The lengths and directions of the property sides. So all boundary lines must have bearings or azimuths, some kind of angle measurement, and distance. That's the meets portion. Names of adjoining property owners or abutting highways. Where appropriate, the description should identify the adjoiner and relevant public ways along the boundaries. So not only are you going to say, my property line also is with so-and-so, you're also going to list the recording information of where they have title to that property. And finally, the area of a parcel. So what is the computed area? How many square feet or how many acres does that property contain? Anybody got any questions on any of this stuff? Anything, anybody? Another type of legal description is a block and lot system. If you're in an actual recorded subdivision, this uses the subdivision plat describing the parcels by lot and block numbers within the name and record information of that various subdivision. I grabbed that out of the book there, just showing a small subdivision. I do have an actual real live genuine bona fide example. So I did grab this deed from the Hamilton County Recorder's Office, and this is the whole description of the property. Situate in Section 20, Town 3, Entire Range 1 of the Miami Purchase, Springfield Township, Hamilton County, Ohio, and being Lot 2 of Block 3, Section 3, Brentwood Subdivision Plat, of which subdivision as recorded in Plat Book 72, pages 87 and 88. Hamilton County records, subject to easements, restrictions, and record, if any. So is that really a good description of a property? It is legal, it is valid. What you are then required to do is pull the subdivision plat to get the actual boundary and description of what that lot is. Now this lot subdivision was early mid 1950s, I think. Here's lot 2 right here. And it's the beauty of Hamilton County is like some of these older subdivision plats, it's hard to read. I know it's hard to read here, but if you actually went to the recorder's office and pulled this, it's still going to be hard to read, just the quality. This kind of brings up a little interesting thing I just want to share. I always kind of wondered this in my early surveying career. You go to do a survey on a parcel, you always went to the engineer's office to get a copy of the survey plat of your parcel. Why in the world are subdivision plats in the recorder's office, not the engineer's office? That never made a lick of sense to me. But then realizing with this style of legal description, you have to, that's why the subdivision plats are together in the same recorder's office versus one being in the recorder's office, one being in the county engineer's office. Another type of legal description would be by coordinate. The coordinates describes the property boundaries using state plane or other coordinate systems, tying boundary corners to a defined geodetic reference frame. This is just a generic thing where I found numbers on it. Being able to actually read those is kind of irrelevant. As part of the rules of construction, coordinates are very low on the list of things you hold. Personally, I don't think I've ever seen a legal description or a survey plat that had coordinates on every single corner like this. If you do come across it, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be very rare. Anybody got any questions on these types of legal descriptions, meets and bounds, lot, block, coordinates? No questions? No questions that can't be answered by reading your book, right? The public land surveying system in the United States. Public lands are those areas surveyed, administered, and disposed of under federal public land laws since 1785, covering about 72% of the country in 30 public land survey states. This, I believe, is chapter 22, traces the origin of the PLSS in the early manuals of instructions, the role of the Surveyor General, and the General Land Office. Thomas Jefferson's 1785 ordinance and the evolution of the BLM as today's administrator of remaining federal public lands. Had to pull up a cool map. I mean, what would surveying be without a cool map, right? The areas covered by the public land surveys with principal meridians shown. Areas excluded are the ones shaded. Texas does have a rectangular system similar to the PLSS, but not quite the same. So all those shaded states are what we would just call a meets and bounds state. That's the way the entire state was subdivided by meets and bounds descriptions. It can cause a lot of headache, a lot of confusion, a lot of problems. People trying to go from one ridge line down the holler to the creek and then up to this other tree and back across. They have a lot of problems with like gaps and overlaps of property. The public land system is going to divide everything up basically in squares. So the framework and geometry here, the system starts from initial points, principal meridians, and baselines. Then builds out standard parallels. There's correction lines, guide meridians, and 24-mile quadrangles. These are subdivided into 6-mile townships, and the townships are subdivided into 1-mile square sections. Ideally, there would be 36 sections per township. And your text explains the running of range and township lines, the convergence of meridians, and formulas for angular and linear convergence. So this was even a thing even back in the 1800s, and even seen in Ohio. We'll say, for example, they started down south at like the Ohio River and started going north. As they went up north and then they went over trying to run meridian lines or true grid lines, meaning every line they believe should be parallel, because the earth is not flat, these lines start converging at the poles as you get further north towards the poles. Even in Ohio, as they would go 24 miles, go up 24 miles, expecting to hit 24 miles, they were always short. That's another reason why I always ask if there's any flat earthers in this classroom and want to throw them out if they are. Section lines are pretty common in the PLSS area. A lot of surveys will reference, tie their point of commencement will begin at a section corner and run to the actual property itself. Those of you who have taken history or will take surveying history will kind of get into this a little more with Ohio. It's very unique in the country itself because there's a lot of different methods they use to subdivide these range lines and townships down into break them down into sections. Um, there are step-by-step methods given for subdividing these. They break these sections down into aliquot parts. Okay, so a section is a mile square containing 640 acres. When you mention an aliquot part, you're starting to break down that square section into halves, quarters, eighths, things like that. So an aliquot um, description of a piece of property might say it's the northeast quarter of section 27, township 3, range 2, or something like that. That would be an aliquot description. In your chapter also explains fractional sections and lots along water boundaries or along the north and west sides of the townships, use of protraction on plats, and the goal of maximizing regular sections of a nominal mile square. So a lot of this stuff kind of changed as far as their methods over the years. So we're talking like the 1800s here. What they do more so nowadays is their starting point. They start at the southeast corner of a southwest township and start running north and start running west. I really don't like how this thing bounces. That bothers me. I guess it's that thing. Read up. This is chapter 22, I believe. So yeah, can you imagine trying to subdivide southwest Ohio, southeast Ohio, southern Indiana, using a chain and compass to do this stuff? It was very difficult work to say the least. We have it so easy nowadays, just pull out our GPS and go, bop, there it is, go over to the next one, bop, there it is. Yeah, that's nowhere close to 5,280 feet apart on them section corners. I believe them government surveyors too even got paid by the mile. So not exactly like putting in an 8-hour day or putting in any overtime. It was how much can you run in that much time. You got paid for length. Yeah. And the funny thing is with that too is the surveyor got paid, say, $5 a mile. The surveyor's not the only one on that crew. The surveyor's got chainmen, axemen, a whole group of people, maybe even a wagon train, a cook, and things to that nature. So a survey crew was a large group of people. And the surveyor had to pay that $5 a mile, had to pay everybody out of that. Corners, monuments, and resurveys. There's a strong emphasis in the book on corner marking, what types of monuments are acceptable to use. They use stones, posts, pits, and mounds versus today using pipes and pins and brass caps and magnetic markers. The use of bearing trees and witness corners. I'm going to take a sec here and just ask, anybody have any idea what a witness corner would be? Anybody ever heard of a witness corner? It could. What I'm thinking of here, I hope we're done with, everybody done with the physics written on the board here? For whatever we got going on? I hope so. Yeah, well, that's kind of one of my God-given strengths is to make somebody mad. Say, for example, if I draw right here, can everybody see this okay? You have a property line coming down to a corner and a property line going down here this way. Maybe wherever this actual property corner falls is inaccessible. Say we have a creek or something that meanders on around through here and goes something like this. We can't set the actual physical, we could, but we're not going to set the actual physical corner on in the center of the creek. God knows I've done it in my lifetime before, and it's a pain in the butt. But. So we would typically want to do would be to set a witness corner. Well, I mean, you're going to come back some distance and you're going to set a monument on the property line some actual distance from the corner. Now, what would be ideal is if you could set two of them, one on the property line, some distance from the actual corner. So that's a witness monument is a piece of monumentation that is witnessing the corner. It's not the actual corner, but it's specified some distance away from the actual corner. I just want to bring that up and put a little emphasis on that because in the lab that we have the deed to draw up, it does call for, we have a situation like this where there's a creek running through and it's calling for witness monumentation. So at least wanted to bring that up to your attention. Any questions on what that means? Got that idea down pretty decent? Again, please read the chapters. Sections 22:16 through 22:18 talks in more detail about meander corners and meander lines. Clarifies that mean lines or meander lines follow the mean high water mark and are for plotting, not ownership boundaries. This can also vary by state and municipality. Do you go to the high water mark or the low water mark? That's kind of an important one to think about. Let's look at this here real quick. You may have seen this, you may not have really even considered it much. Let's bring it to your attention. Has anybody ever seen, noticed, and wondered why Kentucky seems to own the majority of the Ohio River? Why is that? I want to say it's the low water mark, but I could be wrong. It might be the high water mark, but I think it's the low water mark of the north bank of the body of water. And they determined who got the north-south line by who became a state first, who was admitted into the Union. Kentucky became a state before Ohio and Indiana, so this pretty much whole process holds true. And that's why in some places you have some really weird lines come through. I'm trying to think of one here. Things that don't look like they would really match. Yeah, that's kind of an odd looking deal here. Like, wow, here this boundary line kind of cuts in and over. Let's also keep in mind we did not have lock and dam systems along the river until the flood of 1913, 1937 for flood control. So, and we know rivers and streams naturally kind of tend to move. So at the time, this is at the time of the state joining the Union, where was that low water mark on the north bank? And it just happens to be here. That's why, if anybody's ever kind of wondered about that, that's kind of the watered down answer for that. I think this is pretty wild. I'll show you this down here. If you go down Evansville. Evansville, Indiana. Apparently, at one time, the river kind of had a hard bend, and right here, or not a flatter bend, I guess. So this actual portion of land that is attached to Indiana, this portion of land is actually Kentucky. That's not going to be on the test. Don't worry about it. But I just wanted to kind of show you guys, like, that was the meaning, and talking about the high mark, low water marks. And in the case of the states, when were they admitted into the Union? Kentucky was before Ohio and Indiana, so they got to, I believe, the low water mark of the north side of the bank. So this is an approximation, a general where that was at the time. Clearly, with like the lock and dam systems and everything like that, things changed, but it's the approximate location of where that was at the time of the land becoming a state. Yeah, it gets kind of weird and wild in some spots, but I just wanted to show you guys that. Oh, shoot. Again, in the 1800s, a lot of acts and things were changed. And maybe at the time that was the low water mark when in the 1700s when Kentucky became a state. And since then, they might have changed it to be a high water mark. I'm not 100% on that. Maybe any history buffs could enlighten me on that. I probably learned at some point in my life, but I can't say I remember now. In section 2219, it also distinguishes obliterated corners versus lost corners. Describes single and double proportion measurements for restoring them. What's a lost and obliterated corner, you ask? What's the difference? Oh, that's a great question. I'm glad you guys asked. We'll look at that real quick. An obliterated corner is one where the original monument is gone, but its position can still be recovered with convincing evidence. A lost corner is one where the position cannot be determined beyond reasonable doubt and must be recreated by proportional measurement from other corners. Make sense? No? I'm not going to lie. To me, I still kind of get those two mixed up in my head occasionally. The obliterated corner, the monument's gone. However, you can still recover its position maybe by other things, old witness trees, witness monuments around it. You could pull back in and find within a reasonable doubt where that is. It can be restored using evidence, trees, fences, walls, things showing occupation, other witness marks, testimony. And a lost corner, that little guy is completely lost. The position cannot be determined beyond reasonable doubt, either from remaining traces or from acceptable documentary or testimonial evidence. The way to return its position there is to reestablish by rerunning lines from independent corners using a single or double proportion measurement to distribute the excess deficiency between record and measured distances. So that's that in a nutshell. Anybody got any questions on any of this stuff? Okay. Yeah. Another example. You go downtown. Say you're in an urban area. I've seen this before, specifically like within the business district of downtown Cincinnati. You look at old plats. You start doing some measurements and realize the building itself is on the right of way. The building corner at an intersection is the actual corner of the property. How are you going to mark that? You can't really do anything because the building's right there. However, if you wanted to set some kind of reference monuments, what would be done? We'll say if this is a building here, and that is actually on the right of way, on the property line, property corners. I have seen and done something like this. They would take the one property or the one building face, extend it some distance, and put a cross notch. Come extend this property line or building line so far, and extend and put a cross notch. Typically, you want to try to even keep that at some even foot. You wouldn't want to go some kind of random. Try to keep it pretty even. So you might see like 3 to 5 feet from a building corner, you might see a cross notch going out in both directions. That's not uncommon. That's another way of doing a witness corner or a reason for one. There's also been instances where a deed or a survey may call a tree a property line. I have seen where people will come off 5 feet from that tree and set a pin on the property line. 5 feet where that tree is. Is that tree going to last forever? That iron pin probably will last longer than the tree. So people may set, yeah, if this was the property line and you got a tree here, you might set witness corners that way. I've seen that before. Some people may argue that's good practice. Some people may argue that's terrible. The tree's the corner and just leave it. Depends on the surveyor you're working for. The early PLSS surveys were low order by modern standards. Think about this. They ran these lines with compasses and chains. We have measuring equipment that technologically is way more advanced. We can measure a lot more precisely now. So historically, they were, depending on what part of the state you're in, they were run pretty decently. However, compared to today's standards, they're kind of a lower quality. That is not to say if you come across a stone that is the section corner and you're saying, well, by my measurements, I'm off 3 feet this way and 5 feet that way. That stone is an original corner, a section corner monument. Regardless of the quality of it, that stone is the location, period. That's going to hold over everything. That's going to hold. Law courts will say, yeah, that stone is the corner, even though the 1800s plat says it should be this distance, and when you measure, it's really something different. That stone's location is going to hold, as an example. There can also still be some challenges and replacements. Water course changes, non-permanent marks. When these guys were coming through originally, they were setting wood posts. I don't think anybody's going to find a wood post from the 1700s. However, a lot of places, counties came through and would maybe pull that uh, non-permanent mark out and set something more permanent. Indiana, for example, the county surveyor is required to recover a certain percentage of every section corner within their county. I want to say 95%, but that might be high. And that's been the case for many, many, many years. So think in the beginning of times when all this stuff was starting to get established, if they found a wood post 100 years ago, they would set witness monumentation around, pull that old post and set a stone or a concrete monument or a rebar or something more permanent. But that didn't always happen. That wasn't always the case. Demonstrates how to write land descriptions using townships, range, sections, and aliquot parts. Obviously, we don't sell land anymore like they did in the 17 and 1800s by sections or quarter sections. It would be kind of nice to buy a quarter section nowadays, but that'd be a lot of money and don't know where you'd actually find it. So the chapter ends with the BLM, National Integrated Land System, and the Geographic Coordinate Database, explaining how modern GIS tools manage PLSS corners, coordinates, reliability, ownership, cadastral data for resource and boundary decisions. Depending on where you go, some counties have records all the way back to this, where section corners were set. What seems to be a common problem is some counties, particularly in southwest Ohio here, but the land between the Miamis, Sims Purchase, Judge Sims kept all the original survey data, all the original survey records at his house or in something. And wouldn't you know that a lot of these wooden structures caught fire, seems like regularly. Courthouses built of wood caught fire. A lot of old original documents and records were lost to time. Sad, sad, sad. Thank you. Good night. Hold on a sec. We're not quite done that. You're not getting away that easy, maybe.